Blood smeared and spattered across the house as 19-year-old Michael Perry wrapped Sandra Stotler's lifeless body in a blanket after shooting the 50-year-old nurse with a shotgun in her own garage. Her corpse was later found floating in Crater Lake, the first of 3 bodies that would surface from one October night in Texas. What started as a simple car theft spiraled into a triple homicide that would haunt Montgomery County forever. Perry and his accomplice didn't just want Sandra's red Camaro. They wanted it enough to kill for it. Then they waited outside her gated community like predators, luring her teenage son Adam and his friend Jeremy to their deaths in the woods. The jury needed only 2 hours to convict Perry. But here's what will shock you. Nearly a decade later, as Perry faced his final moment, he would call his own punishment an atrocity, while forgiving everyone involved in ending his life. Was this genuine remorse, or calculated manipulation from a master deceiver? July 1, 2010. The Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas. Death's waiting room. Michael James Perry woke up knowing this would be his last sunrise. 28 years old. 9 years, 8 months and 7 days since he pulled that trigger. The math was simple. The reality wasn't. At 6 p.m. sharp, the state of Texas would inject poison into his veins for crimes he committed as a 19-year-old kid. But here's what makes this case different from every other execution you've heard about. Perry would spend his final breath calling his own death an atrocity, while simultaneously forgiving everyone responsible for killing him. German filmmaker Werner Herzog had interviewed Perry months earlier, captivated by the contradictions of a man who seemed both remorseful and defiant. The resulting documentary would spark international debate about American justice. But on this sweltering July morning, none of that mattered. 3 families had been shattered on October 24, 2001. Sandra Stotler, 50 years old. A registered nurse who saved lives for a living. Her son Adam, 18, with his entire future ahead of him. Jeremy Richardson, just 17, wrong place, wrong time, wrong night. The victims' names etched in courthouse records. The killer's name about to be erased from the living. Perry had spent 3,287 days on death row. Each sunrise a reminder. Each sunset a countdown. The jury that condemned him had needed only 2 hours to reach their verdict, faster than most people take to watch a movie. The same jury that decided a teenager's mistakes should cost him his life. But what happened in those 9 years between conviction and execution would challenge everything you think you know about redemption, justice, and the possibility of change. Perry wasn't the same person who walked into Sandra Stotler's garage that October night. The question that haunted everyone who encountered him was simple. Does it matter? The warden would ask Perry for his final words in exactly 11 hours and 43 minutes. What he would say would send shockwaves through the criminal justice system and leave witnesses questioning whether they had just watched justice, or something far more complicated. The clock was ticking. The needle was prepared. And Michael James Perry was about to become the center of a moral earthquake that would shake the foundations of American capital punishment. But first, you need to understand how a middle-class kid from Texas became a triple murderer before he could legally buy a beer. April 9, 1982. Michael James Perry entered the world unwanted. His biological mother was a teenager who gave him up for adoption at birth. Before he could even form his first memory, abandonment had already carved its mark into his DNA. But here's where Perry's story breaks every stereotype you know about death row inmates. He wasn't destined for this path. His adoptive parents were caring. Middle class. Stable income. Clean house. Family dinners. Everything the system says should prevent a child from becoming a killer. It didn't matter. By middle school, the cracks were showing. Behavioral problems that started small, talking back, skipping classes, minor theft began escalating into something darker. His adoptive parents had great difficulty controlling him, watching helplessly as their son slipped through their fingers like water through a sieve. Counseling sessions. Therapy appointments. Medication trials. The family tried everything the professionals recommended. Perry sat in office after office, answering questions about his feelings, his anger, his growing disconnect from the world around him. But whatever was brewing inside the teenager's mind remained locked away, inaccessible to parents, therapists, and teachers who were desperately trying to reach him. The puzzle pieces of Perry's psychology would haunt criminal profilers for years. How does a kid with every advantage, love, stability, opportunity transform into someone capable of executing 3 innocent people for a car? Unlike the majority of death row inmates who arrive with resumes of childhood trauma, abuse, and neglect, Perry's background offered no easy explanations. No monster under the bed. No boogeyman to blame. Just a regular American family watching their adopted son metamorphose into something they couldn't recognize or understand. The behavioral issues escalated throughout high school. minor infractions became major problems. The sweet child they'd welcomed into their home was disappearing, replaced by someone cold, calculating, and increasingly disconnected from consequences. But here's what makes Perry's story truly chilling. There were no obvious warning signs of the violence to come. No animal cruelty. No fire setting. No obvious psychological red flags that would later make sense to investigators piecing together his descent into murder. Perry was hiding something far more dangerous than anyone realized: the capacity to kill without hesitation, wrapped in the package of an ordinary American teenager. What transformed this middle-class kid into a predator would remain one of the most disturbing mysteries of his case, even as the needle found its mark 9 years later. October 24, 2001. A Wednesday that would redefine evil in Montgomery County, Texas. 19-year-old Michael Perry and his accomplice Jason Burkett had a simple plan: steal some cars. Easy money. Quick score. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out, when teenage impulses collided with loaded weapons and zero regard for human life. Their target wasn't random. Sandra Stotler's home in Conroe sat in a gated community, surrounded by the kind of suburban tranquility that breeds false security. 50 years old. Registered nurse. Single mother raising her teenage son. Sandra represented everything good about Middle America. She had no idea she was about to become the first casualty in a killing spree that would shock Texas. Perry entered through the garage while Sandra was inside, probably preparing for another ordinary evening. The shotgun blast that ended her life echoed through the house like thunder, shattering the silence and any pretense that this was just a burglary. Blood spattered across the garage walls. Sandra Stotler crumpled to the concrete floor, her nursing scrubs now soaked crimson. But Perry wasn't finished. The killer had what he came for: Sandra's red Camaro, but loose ends needed tying. When 18-year-old Adam Stotler returned home with his friend Jeremy Richardson, 17, they walked into a nightmare that would cost them everything. Perry was waiting. The shotgun was reloaded. And two teenagers who should have been worried about homework and weekend plans instead faced a cold-blooded predator with nothing left to lose. 2 more blasts. 2 more lives extinguished. Adam and Jeremy never saw their killer's face in those final moments, never understood why their Wednesday evening had become their last. 3 bodies. 1 red Camaro. A motive so senseless it defied comprehension. Perry and Burkett didn't just steal a car that night, they stole futures, dreams, and the peace of mind of an entire community. Sandra would never save another patient. Adam would never graduate high school. Jeremy would never see 18. All because 2 teenagers wanted something that didn't belong to them and were willing to kill for it. But here's what makes this case truly haunting. The murders weren't crimes of passion or desperation. They were calculated, methodical, and executed with the kind of cold efficiency that suggests Perry had crossed a psychological line from which there was no return. The bodies would soon be discovered floating in a nearby lake, wrapped in blankets like discarded trash, while Perry drove Sandra's Camaro around town as if nothing had happened. What investigators would uncover next would prove that October 24th wasn't just a bad decision, it was the day Michael Perry revealed who he really was. The bodies surfaced like nightmares made real. Floating in Crater Lake, wrapped in blankets, 3 lives reduced to evidence in a criminal investigation. Sandra Stotler. Adam Stotler. Jeremy Richardson. The water had preserved the horror, but it couldn't wash away the truth of what Michael Perry had done. Montgomery County detectives had seen murders before. But this was different. This was execution-style killing with a casualness that chilled seasoned investigators to their core. The evidence didn't just point to Perry, it screamed his name from every corner of the crime scene. His DNA was found on a cigarette butt beneath one of the victims, a microscopic signature that would seal his fate more effectively than any confession. Witnesses placed him at Sandra's house. Forensics confirmed the shotgun blast. The red Camaro was recovered with Perry's fingerprints on the steering wheel. When confronted with the mountain of evidence, Perry initially confessed to the murders. The words spilled out of him like poison being drained from a wound cold, clinical details about how he'd killed 3 innocent people for a car. But here's where Perry's psychology revealed its most disturbing aspect. He seemed almost proud of what he'd accomplished. Then came the backtrack. Perry recanted his confession, claiming innocence with the same matter-of-fact tone he'd used to describe the killings. The flip-flopping wasn't evidence of remorse or confusion, it was pure calculation, a desperate attempt to escape consequences by any means necessary. The Montgomery County prosecutors had built cases before, but rarely had they encountered evidence this overwhelming or a defendant this cold. The jury needed only 2 hours to convict Perry of capital murder. faster than most people take to eat dinner and watch a movie. 6 additional hours to sentence him to death. 8 hours total to decide that Michael Perry's life should end for what he'd done on October 24, 2001. His co-defendant Jason Burkett received life in prison, but Perry, the trigger man, the executioner, would face the ultimate penalty. Justice in Texas moved with startling efficiency when the evidence was this clear and the crimes this heinous. But as Perry was led away to death row, one question lingered in the courtroom. Had they just condemned a monster or created one through the very act of sentencing him to die? The answer would emerge over the next 9 years as Perry transformed from killer to something far more complex on death row. The Polunsky Unit, Texas Death Row, where men wait to die. For 3,287 days, Michael Perry lived in a concrete box measuring 60 square feet, knowing that each sunrise brought him closer to a needle filled with poison. But something unexpected happened during those 9 years between conviction and execution. Perry began to change, or at least appeared to. The cold-blooded killer who had executed 3 people without hesitation started expressing remorse for the victims' families. He maintained his innocence throughout his appeals, yet somehow managed to convey genuine sorrow for the pain his actions had caused. It was a psychological contradiction that would fascinate everyone who encountered him. Enter Werner Herzog. The legendary German filmmaker interviewed Perry months before his scheduled execution, drawn to the moral complexities of a case that defied easy categorization. What Herzog discovered was a man who seemed nothing like the monster described in court records: articulate, thoughtful, and disturbingly human. Perry spoke about faith, redemption, and his impending death with a calmness that unsettled everyone in the room. This wasn't the raging psychopath you'd expect to find on death row. This was someone who appeared to have genuinely evolved during his decade of isolation, transformed by the very sentence designed to end his life. But here's the question that haunted Herzog and everyone else who met Perry. Was this transformation real, or the final performance of a master manipulator? The appeals process dragged on for years, each legal maneuver a desperate attempt to save Perry's life while families of the victims waited for closure. Court documents piled up like tombstones, motions, briefs, hearings, all chronicling the slow march toward July 1, 2010. Perry used his time writing letters, reading, and preparing for death with a serenity that seemed almost supernatural. Fellow inmates described him as quiet, respectful, and surprisingly kind, characteristics that directly contradicted the brutal efficiency with which he'd murdered Sandra, Adam, and Jeremy. The psychological evolution of Michael Perry during his time on death row would become one of the most compelling aspects of his case. Had 9 years of contemplating mortality truly changed him, or was this simply his final manipulation and attempt to generate sympathy in his last act? The answer would die with him in 11 hours and 17 minutes. 6:00 a.m. Michael Perry's last sunrise. The routine began like every other morning for the past 3,287 days: breakfast through a slot, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the constant awareness that death was coming. But today was different. Today the countdown had reached 0. Perry spent his final hours with his spiritual advisor, preparing words that would either redeem him or damn him forever in the eyes of history. The conversations were private, sacred, and ultimately unknowable, a condemned man wrestling with mortality while the clock ticked toward 6 p.m. No special last meal. Texas had ended that tradition. Perry ate standard prison fare, the same slop served to every other inmate, as if the state wanted to strip away even the smallest dignity from his final day. At 5:30 p.m., the guards came. The walk to the execution chamber at the Walls Unit was methodical, bureaucratic, and terrifyingly final. 28 steps from death row to the gurney. Perry walked them calmly, his earlier confessions and retractions now irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the next 17 minutes, strapped down. For inserted witnesses staring through bulletproof glass at a man about to die for crimes he committed as a teenager. 6:00 p.m. sharp. I want to let everyone here who is involved in this atrocity know they're forgiven by me. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the witnesses believed about justice, redemption, and the moral authority of the state. Perry called his own execution an atrocity, while simultaneously forgiving everyone responsible for killing him, a final contradiction from a man who had spent 9 years defying easy categorization. The poison began flowing at 6:02 p.m. Perry's eyes closed. His breathing slowed. The monitors flatlined at 6:17 p.m. on July 1, 2010. Michael James Perry was pronounced dead. But his final words would haunt everyone in that chamber for the rest of their lives. 6:17 p.m., July 1, 2010. Michael James Perry's heart stopped beating, but the questions he left behind continued to pulse through America's conscience. 19 When he pulled the trigger. 28 when the state pulled his plug. 9 years of transformation or manipulation that ended with words that still echo in that execution chamber. I want to let everyone here who is involved in this atrocity know they're forgiven by me. Werner Herzog's documentary Into the Abyss immortalized Perry's case, turning a Texas triple murder into an international debate about justice, redemption, and the morality of state-sponsored death. The film didn't provide answers, it multiplied the questions. Was Perry's final act of forgiveness genuine spiritual growth, or the ultimate psychological manipulation from a master deceiver who had 9 years to perfect his performance? The families of Sandra Stotler, Adam Stotler, and Jeremy Richardson watched their loved one's killer die that night. Some felt justice was served. Others wondered if they'd witnessed something far more complex and troubling than simple retribution. Perry's case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about teenage culpability, the possibility of redemption, and the moral authority we grant our justice system. Can someone truly change in the shadow of death? Should crimes committed at 19 carry the ultimate penalty 9 years later? The needle found its mark. The poison did its work. But Michael Perry's final contradiction, calling his execution an atrocity while forgiving everyone involved, continues to challenge everything we think we know about justice, mercy, and the value of human life. 3 families lost everything on October 24, 2001. One more family lost everything on July 1, 2010. The only question that remains is this: which loss was justice and which was tragedy? You decide. What do you think? Was Michael Perry a monster who got what he deserved, or a broken teenager who deserved a second chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this case fascinated you as much as it did us, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because next week, we're diving into another death row case that will challenge everything you believe about justice and redemption. You won't want to miss it.